we were having a little chat in the speaker lounge a little while ago, and Mrs. Birla and I were discussing the need to talk about mental health, which is really what this discussion is about. And I'm quite a fitness enthusiast. I've been exercising since I was 15. I was indoctrinated at a very early age by my father. And I've put in a lot of effort over the years. I'm 43, so exercising for a hell of a lot of years now. But I wish I had started working on my mental health as long ago as I did on my physical health. I started actively working on my mental health only about 4 or 5 years ago. And I can tell you, I'm a different person today from what I was 4, 5, 6 years ago. It's because I acknowledged that the need to address your mental health is as much, if not more, than your physical health. And taking that cue forward, Mrs. Birla, I'd like to ask you, what prompted you to start addressing this? Because of course we all know, to address anything, the need for dialogue is paramount. You can't attempt to change something without a degree of awareness. And that is what your new mission in life is. Not really new, but that is what your current mission in life is.
Yes, absolutely, Gul. Very warm good morning to all of you here. It's wonderful to be here actually and talking to you, Gul, on this. Like you said, mental health is an area, a domain where not much is spoken about. And in fact, when we started 6 years ago, it was much less spoken about than what it is today. At least today, we can be on this stage, talking about it openly. Back then, the first press conference that we had when we launched Empower, you won't believe it, we had all of 2 journalists who came for it. It was that less spoken about, and the stigma was so deep-rooted. So I think one realized that, in your journey in life, like how you said, you've now started focusing on your mental health. I think one realizes the need for it. When you have children who are growing up and they face issues, when you yourself as an individual, when you face issues, you realize that the awareness is usually lacking, and then even when you're aware, the treatment is usually lacking. There was no place where you could really go to if you needed help, if you needed professional help. So I think just trying to bridge that gap is what was the genesis for Empower. Trying to bridge the gap between, awareness and making it more accessible to people.
Empower Minds is something that you started, as you said, some years ago, and how it was absolutely not normal to be talking about mental health then. It still isn't normal to be talking about mental health. The moment somebody says, I have mental health issues, suddenly you begin to doubt their competence, you begin to doubt their ability to function. But I think as a society, we are taking small baby steps towards having these conversations. And I'd like to thank the ABP network for putting this session together, because such conversations are of paramount importance if we are to be a valuable human resource. I mean, just like you talk about your physical health, you'd want to talk about your mental health as well, and you should have the freedom and the empowerment to talk about, in your own words, if you have a fever, you'd say you have a fever, but you should be able to say that you're not feeling quite right, and that shouldn't be dismissed. Now, that is the need of the hour, the fact that we use every forum, every platform to speak about it. It doesn't mean that everybody needs an intervention, but how do you decide whether they need care, they need guidance, they need intervention? How do you begin to address the process of awareness of mental health?
So I think awareness really needs to start at your own individual level first. So just taking a cue from what you said, that, had you started focusing on your mental health years ago, you would have been in a much better place. So I think, you know, what you're saying is absolutely right. And that's why I feel that creating awareness early on is so important. So when I had Ananya, which was like years ago now, I was a kid myself. I was very young myself. And the awareness was, you know, really lacking. So I went through postpartum depression at that point in time. I had no clue on what was happening to me and why it was happening to me. And I just found myself feeling so guilty all the time, because here I was, I had just had a baby, my firstborn. It was supposed to be a very beautiful moment in my life, which it was. But it was also, I was also grappling with bouts of crying, just feeling very low, not knowing what was happening and why it was happening. And everybody in the family was also very confused that, you know, what is happening and why are you so upset? And I myself didn't know what was happening. And that's when I started reading up about it, and I realized that there is something called postpartum depression. You know, of course, I mean, I was able to, you also overcome it, right? And I was able to overcome it. But had I known that something like that does happen and that it's normal, I would have been able to speak about it more openly. I would have not been so hush-hush about it. I would have been able to deal with it much better, and being able to deal with the first few months of my child, knowing that it's okay to feel like that as well. So therefore, I think building that awareness right from the beginning is very, very important. I mean, I've been talking about postpartum, but you also now have, children who are grappling with so many issues. So if they know that, you know, whether it is anxiety, whether it is panic, whether it is feeling low, are all things that can happen to people, can happen to young adults, can happen at a much younger age. You're just able to deal with it much better. So I think creating that awareness with yourself. I also feel that it's very important to start creating awareness at a school level, because, you know, you have a captive audience. You're able to sensitize the children right from an early age. You're able to also then bring about mental health literacy with their teachers, with the parents. I think it's an entire ecosystem that we really need to bring awareness about.
I think that was very candid of you to share. And, you know, adding to that, I must say that that is one aspect of motherhood that no one wants to talk about, because it's equated to the most beautiful experience in your life, which it is. But the toll it takes on a new mother is phenomenal. And here's the science behind it. Or rather the lack of it. Medical science has been so focused on neonatal and pediatric care that the physiological changes in a woman post-childbirth have only now begun getting academic research level interest. And this I'm talking from the level of medical schools of Mayo and Brown in the US, the top of the medical field really. Because of the preoccupation and focus on the child, the physiological aspect of the mother was never discussed, and which actually coincides with the emergence of acknowledging the need to talk about mental health. It's all happening technically at the same time, around the time that research into women and their mental health around childbirth, post-childbirth, is actually at the same time as the mental health conversation globally. You mentioned how the intervention in schools is really important, so you don't have to wait till 35, 36 to wake up and start addressing your mental health, or you don't have to be at the forefront of a personal situation to start discussing mental health. Tell us about some of the things Empower Minds is doing at a school curriculum level.
So, for example, we have this curriculum, it's a progressive curriculum. So just like you have a math curriculum or a history curriculum, we have a mental health curriculum, which is age appropriate and starts from a young age. It talks about what are the different mental health illnesses, what are the different mental health concerns, what are the reasons for it, how do you deal with them, and it covers an entire gamut right from anxiety, depression, panic to eating disorders, body shaming, personality disorders, all of that. So I think it really helps in, sensitizing the children to what the issues could be, to knowing how to deal and cope with them. Because one thing is to know that, okay, I have a problem. But the more important conversation is what you do about it, right? How do you access treatment? How do you access mental health care? And also knowing that it's okay to feel like that. It's okay that you don't feel well, but it's not okay not to seek help. It's like saying that if you have fever, right, like the conversation we were having earlier, or if you have a fracture, you're not going to just live with it, right? You're going to go to the doctor, you're going to get to fix it. So similarly, if you have a mental health concern, you have to fix it. You have to go to the medical practitioner and take whatever steps are needed to fix that problem so that you're able to lead a fulfilled life. I don't think that it's fair to discriminate against anybody who has a mental health concern. In fact, I think it's a myth because, all of us know that even high achievers can go through mental health concerns. I mean, the two can coexist, right? So therefore, it's very important to have that awareness and then to be able to access mental health care.
It's so poignant that you mentioned that, because mental health or anything which makes you feel not 100% mentally healthy is not the sole domain of somebody who's not successful, somebody who is not getting their way in life. On the contrary, in fact, everybody across the spectrum has some form of lack of mental health at some point of time or the other in their lives. It's just that we as a society are not conditioned to either discuss it or to talk about it. And some of the most empowered people will typically say, oh, you're fine, just go grab an ice cream, or you'll be fine, everything is fine, because we're not conditioned to talking about it. And I hope that in some years when somebody says, I'm not feeling fine, that immediately elicits the same kind of concern. When someone says, I've got a headache or I've got a fever, that level of concern that we show a colleague or a family member or a friend when they talk about even the mildest form of physical discomfort should come out when you talk about the mildest form of mental discomfort. And I think that really is the starting point of trying to get this conversation going. You also mentioned, Mrs. Birla, that apart from introducing through Empower Minds a curriculum across schools, and Pan-India is the vision, you're also setting up centers where people can seek help once they've identified they have a problem. Would you like to talk about that?
Yes. So we've got, we also provide comprehensive clinical care at Empower. And we have set up centers. So like, say, for example, Bombay has 3, out of which one is a foundation which is running at, which is for the economically challenged section of society. We also have a center in Calcutta, Bangalore, Hyderabad, Goa, Pilani, where we have a whole team of psychiatrists and psychologists who are offering that clinical care. And we're reaching out to children, adolescents, adults, and geriatrics. So initially when we had started Empower, 6 years ago, we had started it with keeping in mind that we will only do it for adolescents, because I felt that that's an age where a lot of change needs to be brought about. But as we went along, we realized that the need, even in adults or geriatrics, is so huge that we've actually now expanded and we're offering clinical care pretty much across the lifespan. So we do offer comprehensive clinical care. We also offer occupational help, therapy, speech therapy. So it's like a one-stop shop, like a 360-degree mental health care solution.
I think we're working towards a world where it'll be as normal to walk into a clinic for physical health conditions as it would be for when you're not feeling quite right mentally.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the vision where, you are able to normalize mental health as much as physical health. In fact, there's a joke in my house, in our household, is that we put so much of emphasis on mental health that physical health issues normally get a little sidelined. That's the kind of mental health care that we have at home, and that's the amount of conversation that we have around it. And I wish that, more and more people and more families would lay that much emphasis, because until your mental health is not in the right space, no matter what, you'll never be on the top of your game. Or then you're just struggling so much that you're just feeling that you're swimming against the tide every single day.
I think that's really, I would say, progressive and forward thinking of you as a family to talk about that, because very often one will read in the newspapers about a high achiever girl or a boy who's just topping their school, suddenly taking very drastic steps and harming themselves, and everybody asks what appear now to be inappropriate questions. Arey, isko kya zarurat thi? Iske paas to sab kuch hai.
Exactly.
And that is typically the question that most people are continuing to relate to with mental health, that there has to be something bad that happens to you to trigger a mental health episode. It usually, it doesn't have to be, failing an exam or a personal family level tragedy. Of course, that can be a trigger, and of course, professionals are the ones who guide you through that. But sometimes it's the best of your times professionally, and we've had so many people speak up, from Deepika to seeing someone, to lose people like Robin Williams and Heath Ledger at the peak of their careers.
So that's exactly what I was saying earlier, is that you can be a high achiever and doing extremely well in your professional life, but you could also be struggling with mental health concerns. So it's very important to address that. And I think what happens is that most of us, somewhere deep down, believe that it's a personal failing. You feel that you have failed as an individual if you're grappling with a mental health concern. If you have anxiety, for example, you feel that there's something wrong with you. You're not strong enough to be able to deal with the situation in life, and therefore you have anxiety. But the fact of the matter is that anybody could be having anxiety. And if you're dealing with anxiety on a daily level and yet being able to be a productive individual, you're actually, really brave and strong, which means that you're dealing with anxiety and pulling along and dealing with life, which is, and doing great work. So it's a double whammy in a sense, if you know what I mean. So therefore it's very, very important to deal with those issues.
To be in a high performance job and pull along and remain functional while, battling what could potentially be a very, very serious concern from a mental health standpoint. I want to take this conversation towards, before we come back to all the incredible work you're doing, and I wanted to also talk about the work that you do with the police in Mumbai. I think when you talk about family and how much you prioritize mental health and how much you've empowered your family, tell me a little bit about the incredible work Aditya is doing. Because I firmly believe empowered mothers create empowered daughters. Tell me something about what she's doing, and then we'd like to get a mic across to Aditya here, who's going to tell us a little bit. I promise not to put you in the spot, but just a little bit about what you're doing, because I think it's incredible. The same step that you've taken to go after something that's less talked about, and you've taken this as a mission to normalize it. It needs to be a normal conversation. Aditya is doing that in a similar way for a different issue.
So I'm actually really proud of what my daughter Aditya is doing. She's just launched an initiative called Ujas, which she's going to talk about more, and working in the space of menstrual health and hygiene. So it's something that I'm personally very, very proud of as a mom.
Would you like to tell us something about it?
Thank you. So Ujas is an initiative which works with menstrual health, hygiene and management, and we work with grassroots level organizations. We have 3 verticals under Ujas, which is awareness. So we create awareness with girls, with their families, with mothers. We have distribution, so making products more accessible and affordable for our beneficiaries. And we have sustainability, which we look at implementing sustainable measures of intervention so that girls can be self-sufficient and they don't have to rely on anything else or anyone else. And I truly believe that menstrual health is very much connected to women empowerment, and it's a basic human right. And I think that's what really led me to start Ujas.
Thank you for that. I think this young lady deserves a big round of applause. She's just out of school and already finding a way to make a difference. Now, I also want to draw a link back into the lack of discussion and conversation on menstrual health and how that directly has a bearing on the mental health of women. I mean, when I was growing up as a 12-year-old, if I had to go to buy menstrual supplies at a chemist, I had to ask for 5 things. And the 5th thing would be, sanitary pads. It shouldn't have to be that way. And unless and until men and women and mothers and fathers normalize conversation on menstrual health, it's not going to happen. So kudos to you and kudos to you, Mrs. Birla, for raising a daughter like this. Because we need to have these conversations.
Thank you. You're absolutely right, actually. And the statistics that she tells me are so appalling that we, over here, like in Bombay, for example, in our kind of houses, also, there's a lot of stigma. But of course, what she says and what happens at the grassroots level, at the rural level, is far worse and absolutely unthinkable. So I'm really happy that she's taken up this cause and she's really doing it with a lot of, she's very passionate about it. And I'm sure that it's going to make a huge difference and huge impact. And like you very rightly said, that it has a direct bearing on the mental health as well of women. So it's a huge area of need.
And young girls who have to go buy themselves menstrual supplies. I mean, I remember the trauma of having to go to that chemist because my mother would take care of this. I was 12, 13, I think I was 12 or 13. I was in winter break visiting my grandparents and I didn't know how to do it. And my heart was beating at like HIIT levels that's the only parallel I can give being a fitness person. And I didn't know how to have this conversation. And there were only men in the like you have only men selling lingerie in India. You only have men in chemist stores. And I didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
So, it was so traumatizing for me that, and I come from a very, very empowered liberal space. So can you imagine what it's like for little girls out there where conversations around menstrual health have not even happened?
Yeah.
And is it fair to just throw our little girls to the lions of menstrualhood without adequately educating them? I mean, that's a question we all need to ask ourselves. It's not something you can hide away from anymore.
You're absolutely right, but I think what's also very important is to educate the men. It's very, very important to educate the men about it. I mean, a simple thing like what you are saying, even I remember going down to the shop to buy, say, pads for myself, and it's such an awkward thing to say that mujhe sanitary napkin chahiye. I mean, what do you say? Right? And then they would normally wrap it up in a newspaper and then put it in a plastic bag. I mean, like, you're wondering what is happening. I mean, is it that taboo that you can't even, show it through a packet? I mean, you got to wrap it in a, newspaper. And in fact, very recently, I was in a small town and I needed to pick up a packet of pads and it was such an awkward moment for the other person who was selling it to me because he was hush-hush about it. And then he said, mere paas newspaper nahi hai, main kisme wrap karun? I said, I don't need a newspaper. And I just literally took it in my hand and I just walked off with it.
That's an empowered woman. I mean, a woman, really, that doesn't happen. And these things need to happen every day, in every home, in every shop across the country. And that's the goal that I'm hoping, Aditya, you will achieve over time. I want to come back to you and the counseling work that you're doing, but I do want to give my friend Radhika a heads up here. Although there wasn't an audience round planned, and I don't think Radhika counts as a member of the audience. So I'd like you to actually put forward a question towards as we draw to the close of this session, please. So you have about 10 minutes to prepare for it, Radhika, in case you wanted some heads up. So coming back, Mrs. Birla, so we've talked about how there's intervention by Empower Minds at every level across various stakeholders. There's a school curriculum that is being prepared and being requested requesting schools to inculcate it because it's not mandatory. But there is some legislation with regard to mental health. Would you like to shed light on it, because I'm unaware of it?
Yeah. So there's a Mental Health Care Act, which was 2017 actually, which has actually now providing protection for the rights of people suffering from mental illness. Earlier on, actually, the Mental Health Care Act 1987 actually prioritized institutionalization, and which meant that it did not give the right to a person suffering from a mental health illness to decide his modality of treatment. So it wasn't really protecting the rights. So the new act, which has replaced the 87 one, so the one in 2017 now actually protects the rights of people suffering from mental illness. It also gives them autonomy to decide what modality of treatment they want. And the biggest actually achievement of it has been to decriminalize suicide. Because up until then, suicide was a criminal offense, right?
307, I think, IPC 307.
So now with it being decriminalized, it's actually, obviously because a person who's even going towards suicide or thinking about suicide is obviously somebody who needs treatment, and you don't want the family to be then grappling with legal hassles. So I think that has been the biggest achievement of the latest act. And also, empowering the person, the individual, to kind of seek the help that they want is a huge step forward as well.
I think it just shows the complete lack of awareness and general GK that most people don't know there is an act passed by legislature to this effect, and it's been around for quite some time. I frankly was not aware of it until you brought it out, and I did know that it was a crime under the Indian Penal Code to commit suicide. So if you did survive not killing yourself, then the state would prosecute you. So imagine the trauma that you have to be undergoing to first take a drastic step, like taking your own life, and then have the state prosecute you for trying to do that. I mean, I don't remember the section, but I studied in law school now. So it was appalling because, the whole murder punishment for murder is from 300 to, 306, 307. And even then, preparing for IPC, I was like, what is this? Somebody tell me the section for where, is anybody here in the audience who can quickly pull out the IPC section that criminalized suicide? Come on, there's a legal team from ABP here.
So
quickly.
Actually, that's the thing, right? After having done that, I mean, the human side of it is just completely missed out, because you do want... you have to realize that the person who's even taking such a drastic step actually needs treatment. You don't want to be grappling with legal issues at that point in time. So the human aspect of it was completely missed out.
I think which is very progressive. So while our governments are making efforts, this government, and the original act is older, in fact, so some credit must be due to the previous government as well. But it just shows that, it's a penal code from 1860. And things must change with time, and the human aspect and the awareness that comes with mental health must be dealt with. So, taking directly the penal angle, tell us about your work with the police and how that is a big pillar of the work that you do for society, specific to people who've been victims of atrocities, and how you help their mental health.
So this is a project actually that's very close to my heart. I think we're working with the Mumbai police, where we first sensitized a lot of the police force across Mumbai so that they become the first point of contact while dealing with rape victims, right? Because there's a certain amount of sensitivity that is needed, and then they are also able to sort of guide them towards seeking help. So what our counselors are doing is actually working with the victims of rape and domestic violence. I mean, forget the physical abuse, right? I mean, keeping that aside, the emotional abuse and the emotional trauma that they go through after such a crime is something that our counselors are looking at working on with them. So we are training the police, and then they also then refer the cases to our counselors, and we're working across Mumbai city. So we've got counseling cells set up where our counselor is sitting, and we've actually got women now coming up and seeking help, which also is very telling, because initially when we started it, we had very few takers, we had very few women coming up for it. But I think with the passage of time, women are realizing and again are open to seeking help, for themselves. So I think it's something that I'm really, happy that we are able to reach out to the victims of rape and domestic violence.
Which I think is progress to discuss. I mean, ultimately, they're acknowledging that there is a need to discuss mental health. And I think acknowledgement also here for the progressive attitude of the police. To also acknowledge that there is trauma which is far beyond physical, which lasts much longer than the physical trauma, which needs to be addressed. So I think there's progress happening all around, where, whether we will see and how soon we'll see mental health curriculums starting from KG, you said, going up towards the higher classes and making sure teachers are trained, which is what the foundation works on, making sure that you're making centers where somebody can reach. You also mentioned there's a chat bot and a helpline.
Yeah. So we've also launched a helpline actually, which is 24/7, which we launched during COVID. And but what we also realized is that during COVID, a lot of times people could not speak because they had no privacy. So we also launched a chat facility so that people who are wanting to talk about it but are not able to physically talk, were able to access the chat with our counselors. So that is something also that we've launched. Of course, the helpline also is doing very well. We do have a lot of callers. Surprisingly or not surprisingly, 80% of our callers are male.
A male?
Are male.
So all the gentlemen who are not sort of acknowledging what's happening here, it's okay. It's absolutely normal to have moments and episodes. And I can see a lot of women nodding because I think women are far more open. I'm not partial to women because I'm a woman.
I think it's two ways actually. What it tells us also is that, men also have a lot of mental health issues, but because of stigma are not willing to seek help. The helpline offers it to them incognito, which is what makes it easier for them to actually access it and avail the services. The other thing that it also tells us is that, and the question that comes to my mind is that, are women not wanting to seek help? Are they not acknowledging that they need the help as well? So it's both ways really. It does, open up questions as to, why would 80% of the callers be male only? So it's both ways really. I mean, it's something that only time will tell really and have an answer. But coming back to the police, something else that's also, which I'm very happy about that we're working with is with the CISF. We're also working with the CIFS Mumbai and Delhi and, Pan-India, of course, where we're again providing sensitivity and sensitization programs. We're also creating programs to actually have mental health buddies for their senior officers. So we're sensitizing them, and we also have a cell where we have counselors sitting where actually CISF personnel come and seek help. So that is again an area. So, like you said, the police are also very progressive. The CISF is also very progressive. I think people are realizing the need for it and are actually approaching us for help, which actually makes me feel very, very happy about, which means people are open to it, which was not there. I mean, these problems existed, but people are now willing to seek help for it.
I think it's definitely a welcome step because life in the uniform is a very, very high pressure life. You live away from your families for the better part of the year, better part of your lives really. And here's something that, I'm going to leave in terms of when it comes to mental health and uniform. I don't know how many people in this room are aware that the Indian Army and the Indian Armed Forces do not recognize PTSD. I'll repeat that to let it sink in. The Indian Armed Forces Medical Board, and I can say that on good authority, does not recognize post-traumatic stress disorder. So all other armed forces in the world have embraced it. They have found that to be the #1 reason for self-harm in veterans. And especially when you have armed forces, people in uniform, when I was referring to the armed forces, I specifically meant the Air Force, Army, and the Navy. But it does extend to the BSF and the CRPF, and we have seen incidents of fratricide over the last few months. Some of them don't make it to the papers. But we do not acknowledge medically PTSD, and maybe that could be an area of intervention at some point, and maybe a goal to pursue.
Yeah. So we are working in that space actually, where we're actually also now, going down to the level of screening. So typically, you only have physical health checkups. You don't have mental health checkup as a part of the screening. But we're introducing that as a part of the CISF basic training as well. Because it's very important to know that, right? That what is the baseline? Are you taking on people already who have issues? So you then treat them very much so that we're able to, at least reduce the level of self-harm and of fratricides as well.
I think that's incredible, and that really gladdens my heart, because I have a friend who's a lawyer who's one of India's leading military law activists, and it has been his big disdain that PTSD and mental health issues attributable to the job have not been acknowledged. But I want to move back for a second before we conclude this. I did want to have a slightly lighter question also, and I'm going to take that very quickly. What does Mrs. Birla do for fun?
For fun. So a lot, actually. Starting with spending some good time with my children. So we would normally, either go out or party together. We travel a lot together. So that's a lot of fun, actually, for me. In fact, Aditya and I just came back from Jordan, and I think it was a great trip. So I think that's our kind of fun that we really like to do.
Thank you. And Radhika, before we conclude this session, you, Mrs. Birla spoke about mental health buddies. And I think by default, you and I have been, without putting any nomenclature to that tab, we've been chatting about this. And I think the reason that men are probably reaching out more, and that's my theory, is perhaps because women are more open. We discuss our problems with other women far more easily than perhaps men do. And that's so much pressure on men to not be able to have a conversation with a colleague or a friend. Every woman will beyond at some point of time or the other, will seek out another woman that she can speak to about what's weighing her down. And Radhika and I have been having this chat. So over to you, Radhika.
Thanks very much for that, Gul. I think we can have a much more detailed chat about her and me. And I think at a certain life stage, you encounter certain situations which can bring on anxiety and things like that. A lot of the things we've covered today, were around the questions I wanted to ask you. But I found it very interesting that one statistic that you brought out about a very large number of men actually, calling the helpline that you've initiated. I want to sort of go away from this setting. We are sitting in Mumbai. We are well-read, educated people. We are aware, right? But when you look at tier 2 and tier 3 cities, where the economics of a household are very different, the education levels are extremely different as well, I want to understand from you, what are the surprising things you've learned from there? Are women as aware? Gul and I can talk to each other on a day we're feeling down. Do conversations around mental health happen there? What are some of the statistics that you've picked up from the tier 2, tier 3, where, like I said, the setting is very, very different from where we stand?
So I think the basic lacuna, the basic gap is awareness. People are not even aware of anything like a mental health concern. So I think awareness is what we need to really first tackle with. So just to give you an example, we started a district level mental health program with the government of Maharashtra, where we're actually, we've taken up, at the moment, we've taken up the Jalna district. We will be going pan-Maharashtra. In Jalna, we are actually screening individuals and people who come to the primary healthcare center. So we've screened thousands of people. But out of the thousands, maybe 1 or 2% are really coming back for further intervention. The need is much more, but it's a very minuscule number that is actually coming back for intervention. So that's despite our follow-up calls, follow-up messages, or following up with them every time they're coming. But the awareness is not there. So I think it's our first really area of concern, and what we really need to tackle is creating that awareness amongst people, particularly in tier 2 and tier 3 and at a district level, that there is a need for it. I think it's always taken such a back seat. It's really never been in the forefront of things at all.
And I'm so glad that you're working in that area. I think that's where most of the work really is required. Thank you for answering that.
Thank you, Radhika, and thank you so much. I think this has been a really, really enlightening session, and I think we will leave every person in the audience with a lot of food for thought. Thank you for being such a great audience, and thank you so much, Mrs. Birla, for such a candid chat.
Thank you
very
thanks
much.
so much, Gul. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
ये है Ideas of India.